In 1966, the Soviet Union fielded a vehicle that changed everything, the BMP-1. Before the BMP-1, infantry rode to the battlefield in armored boxes and got out to fight on foot. The M113 carried American soldiers. The British FV-432 carried British soldiers. The Soviet BTR-60 carried Soviet soldiers. All of them were armored taxis. Get in, ride to the fight, get out, fight. The BMP-1 changed the principle entirely. It was not an armored taxi. It was an armored fighting vehicle that happened to carry infantry. It had a 73mm gun. It had a Saga anti-tank missile. It had firing ports so that infantry inside could engage the enemy without dismounting. Soviet infantry would now fight from inside their vehicles. The NATO armies that had built armored personnel carriers looked at the BMP-1 and understood immediately that they had the wrong kind of vehicle. If Soviet infantry was going to fight mounted, NATO infantry needed a vehicle that could fight back. Germany understood this faster than anyone else. The Marder was already in development when the BMP-1 appeared. The German requirement had been written in 1959 for a vehicle that could fight as part of a combined arms team, not just transport infantry to a fight they would conduct on foot. The BMP-1 turned that German requirement from a nice-to-have into an urgent necessity, and what Germany built in response became the template for every infantry fighting vehicle that followed for the next 50 years. To understand the Marder's significance, you need to understand what made the BMP-1 so threatening. The BMP-1 was not primarily a threat to tanks. Its 73mm gun was effective against light armor, but marginal against main battle tanks. The BMP-1's real threat was to the NATO concept of combined arms operation. NATO doctrine, in the 1960s, relied on infantry working in coordination with tanks and artillery. The infantry's job was to deal with threats that tanks could not easily engage: anti-tank infantry in cover, crew-served weapons in buildings, obstacles that needed clearing. The BMP-1 put Soviet infantry inside a vehicle that could fight its way through exactly those situations. Soviet combined arms operations would be faster, more protected, and more capable than anything NATO infantry and M113s could counter. The answer had to be a vehicle that could fight the BMP-1 on equal or better terms while still carrying infantry. The Marder, which entered Bundeswehr service in 1971, was that vehicle. The hull was welded steel, with a protection level that defeated 20mm autocannon rounds across the frontal arc and 7.62mm fire across the sides and rear. The turret mounted a 20mm RH-22 autocannon, firing at 1,000 rounds per minute with an effective range of 1,200 meters against aerial targets and 2,000 meters against ground targets. The 20mm round could penetrate the side and rear armor of a BMP-1 at combat ranges. It could destroy the BTR-60 and BTR-70 armored personnel carriers that accompanied Soviet infantry. It could suppress infantry in the open with a rate of fire that prevented enemy fire teams from moving or shooting back effectively. The vehicle carried 6 infantry plus 3 crew. Unlike the BMP-1, the Marder's infantry did not primarily fight from inside the vehicle. The German tactical concept was that the vehicle would fight while the infantry dismounted to deal with threats that required dismounted action. The vehicle supported the infantry. The infantry supported the vehicle. Together they were more capable than either alone. This concept, infantry fighting vehicle rather than armored personnel carrier, became the definition of a new vehicle category. The Marder was the first purpose-built example of that category in NATO service. The Bradley in America followed in 1981, the CV-90 in Sweden in 1993. Every subsequent IFV in every NATO army descended conceptually from what the Marder had established in 1971. The Marder's engineering was specific to the German operational requirement. The Bundeswehr expected to fight in West Germany, defending against a Soviet breakthrough on the North German plain. The terrain there was a combination of open farmland, urban areas, and dense forest. The Marder was designed for that specific environment. Its 2.95-meter height was relatively tall for an IFV, giving the commander good visibility over the agricultural terrain of the Rhine Valley, but making it a taller target than designers preferred. Its 28.3-ton combat weight was heavier than many comparable vehicles, reflecting the German preference for protection over mobility at the margins. The MILAN anti-tank missile system, fitted to the Marder 1A3 variant from 1988, gave the vehicle a genuine tank-killing capability at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. A Marder equipped with MILAN could engage T-72 main battle tanks from positions where the T-72's gun could not effectively return fire. The thermal imaging added to later variants allowed night operations at a quality that Soviet vehicles in the same era could not match. The Bundeswehr ordered 2,136 Marder vehicles. German industry built every one. The Marder equipped the mechanized infantry formations that were NATO's primary ground defense force in West Germany through the 1970s and early 1990s. The war on the North German plain never came. Germany reunified. The Cold War ended. The Bundeswehr began the long process of reorganizing from a territorial defense force into an expeditionary military. The Marder was sent to Bosnia, to Kosovo, to Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, the Marder operated in conditions it had never been designed for: narrow mountain roads, IED threats rather than anti-tank missiles, village-scale operations rather than armored breakthroughs. The vehicle adapted. Its armor held against most IED threats that smaller vehicles could not survive. Its 20mm cannon provided fire support that German infantry in Afghanistan credited with preventing multiple ambushes from developing into catastrophic engagements. But the Marder was aging. The German military had committed to replacing it with the Puma IFV, a more advanced and more expensive system. The Puma's development was delayed, its costs were high, and the vehicles that were delivered had reliability problems that generated consistent negative headlines. Meanwhile, in storage, Germany held hundreds of Marders, and then Russia invaded Ukraine. Germany's decision to send Marder infantry fighting vehicles to Ukraine in January 2023 was accompanied by the same political controversy that had surrounded the Leopard 2 decision. Germany did not want to be the first nation to send IFVs. Then it was. The Marder shipment was announced alongside the American Bradley commitment. 40 Marder 1A3 vehicles were delivered in the first tranche. Additional shipments followed. Ukrainian crews trained on the Marder in Germany. The training focused on the 20mm cannon's capabilities, the MELA missile system, and the coordination between vehicle and dismounted infantry that defined German IFV doctrine. The operational reports from Ukraine were consistent with what the Marder had demonstrated in Afghanistan. The 20mm Ra-22 was lethal against Russian BMP-2 and BTR-82A vehicles. At 2,000 meters, the 20mm APDS round penetrated the BMP-2's side armor reliably. The BMP-2 that the Marder had been designed to fight in 1969 was still the primary Russian infantry carrier in 2023. 54 years after the Marder's development program had identified the BMP-1 as the primary threat and designed a vehicle to counter it, the Marder was encountering the BMP's successors in Ukraine and destroying them with the same 20mm gun that had been specified for exactly that purpose. The MILAN missiles were used against heavier Russian armor, providing Ukrainian Marder crews with a tank-killing capability that they deployed against T-72 variants at ranges beyond direct fire engagements. Ukrainian crews praised the Marder's reliability. German engineering, they reported, held together in conditions that other vehicles required more maintenance to sustain. The vehicle's greatest limitation in Ukraine was the limitation that had always been known. The 20mm gun was effective against light armor and personnel. Against the heavier Russian vehicles entering service, the T-90M and the BMP-3, with its 100mm gun, the Marder's 20mm was insufficient. The Bradley's 25mm gave it an edge that the Marder's 20mm could not match. The CV-90's 40mm was in a different category entirely. But the Marder worked. It destroyed Russian vehicles. It protected Ukrainian infantry. It did what it had been designed to do. In 1969, German engineers had written a requirement for a vehicle that could defeat the Soviet BMP and its successors while carrying infantry to the fight. In 2023, that vehicle was doing exactly that. The Cold War that the Marder was built for never came. The war it was sent to instead turned out to need exactly what the Marder had.